what this is intended is not to dictate. It was to warn us, to get us away from dead-end directions. Prophecies work this way. If you keep going down this road, you encounter this. If you then don't change your course, the next event or the next bump on this road, this next exponential evidence that you're on the wrong track will look like that. Now, this is all, once we speak about prophecy and prophets and all this stuff, we're in a funny place because it's so charged with belief and religion and authorities and gods and all the things you're touching on. That is not what this is. This is truly the antithesis of it. And my own joke about it, just to take it here, because this is very, very important area you're talking about. My joke was that when these ETs are sitting around going, okay, we've got one more shot at this with the Earth people. Nobody could read or write before, and every time our forefathers worked with somebody to bring in this information, well, it got corrupted because those who could control it controlled it. Now we're in the electronic age coming up here. This will be able to be disseminated, protected, and kept as it should be, blah, blah, blah. Now, how do we get somebody who's not going to be charismatic and have a religion or a cult formed around him and the whole thing going south again, and somebody pipes up and says, I know. By the time the world finds out about this guy, he should be a middle-aged, pot-bellied, gray-bearded, one-armed farmer, and they say, that's good. Let's have that one because he'll have more trouble trying to get this stuff into the world, and that's the way it should be because people are not supposed to believe this. They're supposed to, if anything, take it and go, well, let's see. How do we find out if it's true or not?
But I also think, just on a personal note, and then I want to let you go on and talk about what you're talking about, that nobody, no one person, I don't care who's contacting them, okay? Lord of Lords, ETs of ETs, whatever is contacting a human being, they should not be given the power of God on earth. We still, as human beings, have to listen to our own intuition, our own guidance, our own inner voice, that inner sense, and to trust ourselves, not always to turn to other people and their prophecies as what's coming. There's at least 20 prophecies that are going on at the same time. There's the Hopis, the Incas, the Aztecs. It goes on and on.
Well, let's settle into this. The core of the case, when people say to me, and I did an interview with a guy on CBS Radio Network the other night, and the guy said, well, if you were to say what this was all about, what's the very core of it? I said, the core of it is a teaching that each human being is 100% responsible for their thoughts, their feelings, their actions. They are completely responsible for the lives that they create, that there's nobody sitting above them waiting to, dip them in hot lava if they make a mistake, after they die and all. This is exactly what you're talking about. And it's a bit of an irony or a paradox, whatever you want to call it, because, you see, it isn't about that, well, one man gets to play God. Well, let me tell you, to be told years before it happens, well, your arm's going to be ripped off your body. There's nothing we can do about it. Get used to it because your tasks will increase a lot after that. You're somebody who's a conduit. You can back out of this if you want. But look, if it's true that there are extraterrestrials and that in this particular case that they are indeed have information, they're transmitting it through a person, they could have avoided nearly 70 years of this kind of oblique and seemingly abstract, obscure approach that some people think it is, and simply showed up over the capitals of the world for 5 or 10 minutes and hung out banners or whatever and proved their existence, and then you'd really have trouble because you'd have new gods. And not only that, you'd have people going crazy. You'd have psychosis and suicide. You'd have attacks. The military would go nuts. The world would be destabilized. So if there is an agenda here, and there is one, it is to insert into our world in a pretty much incorruptible form, through rapid dissemination, information that we can take or leave, we can study, and we can understand that in the level of prophecy, this, for thousands of years, has been intended to try to give people a sense, an education as to how life works, how the laws of cause and effect trump all beliefs. There is no chosen people. There is no solitary prophet or only begotten son or any of the rest of this from religions. There is you, there is me, over here, and the rest of the 8 billion of us, each of us responsible completely for our own lives, how we perceive, what we do with any information. We, speaking as someone involved in this material, don't want believers. don't want people joining up to go and march around and knock on people's doors or do anything like that. Well, you got to believe what Billy Meier says. No, somebody has come to try to wake us up. When Paul Revere, allegorically or really got on his horse, he was trying to wake people up. And when you know that the permafrost around this world is melting.
I'm going to just stop you for a minute, and I want to let you complete. I want you to start looking at scientific information instead of agreeing with what everybody is saying and going with the flow. Look at the facts of what's happening. Even the snapshots of the poles, the Antarctica, polar bears, populations dying off. A lot of this is not true. The sea levels rising, not true. And I want you, instead of going on about that, do the research and then come back to me. But I want you to have the facts in front of you. CO2 is not toxic. So let's go back to where you're competent. And where you're competent to me is to talk about Billy Meier's experiences, what he went through, and what's happening today.
Okay, well, I'll just challenge you a little bit, and I'll tell you this, that in 2008, in August and September of 2008, you know that within a couple weeks period, water was discovered on Mars. They discovered that there was small, very tiny.
Are you talking about NASA's assessments that water was discovered on Mars? They've known this for 40 years.
They have known it theoretically from a distance, but they did not have a probe there. They speculated. They discovered the water. They discovered microscopic life forms, and they also discovered that the planet is basically, that the environment is hostile to life. There's microscopic life forms, but it's a hostile environment. They discovered perchlorate in the soils up there. That was all discovered by NASA in 2008, August and September. However, on July 8th, 1976, that information was given to Meier and it's published in a book. Meier was told observed on October 18th or 19th, 1978, that Io was the most volcanically active body in the solar system. He described the content of the ejecta from the volcanoes as being dust particles and sulfur ions, and that one of the main rings of Jupiter was composed of sulfur ions that were and the dust that was escaping from Io, that which was not falling back onto the surface. And he described the surface of Io as this most active, volcanically active body in the solar system as being uncharacteristically smooth, not cratered and pocked as one would expect with all the volcanic activity. And it was explained to him it was because so much of this ejecta was falling back onto the surface of this moon. March 12, 1979, NASA JPL announced that the most important discovery of the Voyager mission was that Io was the most volcanically active body in the solar system. In April, following that, the discovery was made about one of the rings being composed of ionized sulfur particles. Meier, of course, had also described the rings of Jupiter before. While they had been theorized, they had not yet been observed. He described that. He described another moon, Europa, as being ice-encrusted, et cetera, et cetera. He also described the accurate number of moons of Jupiter, the same for Saturn. Also was explained in the 1970s why the scientists would miscalculate the number of moons of Saturn, because they would erroneously identify some of the Adonis asteroids as being moons when they technically were not. In 1958 and in 1978, Meier published that the discovery of two planets beyond Pluto would be made around the time of the new millennium. It goes on and on and on in terms of Meier's scientific information.
It's not a question, is he right a lot? It's a question of, do you expect the public to believe everything he says or to accept everything he says and operate from it? You say people don't have to believe. You're doing this to assist and facilitate people's acceptance of Billy Meier's prophecies.
No.
Well, why are you doing it?
For people to do what I have done, except they can have the benefit of 31 years of my own and other people's research and don't have to spend that time. They can check, test, review, investigate, evaluate, cross-reference information to find out if this information is accurate. I never tell anybody to believe it.
We're not talking about belief now, but the whole point of all of this is to get people to eventually